My eyes opened to darkness, except for a single dim bulb swinging above my head, like a pendulum of dread. I tried to move, but my wrists were locked behind me, cold metal biting into my skin. Panic seized my chest as I realized I couldn't remember how I got here. The last thing I recalled was walking home from the grocery store, then nothing. Just a black void, and now this nightmare. I forced myself to focus, blinking against the harsh light. That's when I saw them, photographs. Hundreds of them plastered across every inch of the concrete walls surrounding me. My stomach dropped as recognition hit. They were all pictures of me. Me in my high school uniform, laughing with friends. Me sitting alone in the college library with headphones on. Me jogging through the park last Tuesday. Me buying coffee at my usual spot downtown. Some were taken from across the street. Others zoomed in so close I could see the reflection in my eyes. This wasn't random. This was methodical, obsessive, terrifying. "You're awake, Jackie." The voice cut through the silence like a blade. I jerked my head up, heart hammering against my ribs. Standing in the shadows near the staircase was a figure I recognized instantly, even after all these years. Declan Morrison. The quiet kid from my old neighborhood who used to live 3 houses down. The one who never spoke to anyone, who always kept his head down, who disappeared into himself like he was invisible. But this wasn't that shy, awkward boy anymore. The man standing before me had changed. His frame was broader, his presence darker, and his eyes, God, his eyes held something dangerous, something that made every instinct in my body scream to run. "Declan, what is this? Why am I here?" My voice came out shakier than I wanted, betraying the terror clawing up my throat. He stepped closer, dragging a metal chair across the floor with a screech that made me flinch. He sat down directly in front of me, close enough that I could smell his cologne. Expensive, masculine, suffocating. "This is everything I've built for you, Jackie. Every moment I've watched you, every breath I've taken has been for you alone. When you smiled, I lived for it. When you cried, I wanted to destroy whatever caused it. When you ignored me, I still couldn't look away." His voice was calm, almost gentle, but the intensity behind it was anything but. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My mind raced back through memories I barely had of him. We'd never been friends. We'd never even had a real conversation. He was just the weird kid in the background, always alone. How had I become this? "You're insane," I whispered, my omega instincts suddenly flaring to life as his scent hit me. Strong, dominant, unmistakably alpha. My body reacted against my will, recognizing the pheromones designed to make me submit. But my mind fought back, refusing to accept this twisted reality. Declan's expression didn't change. He reached out slowly, deliberately, and I tried to pull away, but the chains held me in place. His fingers touched my cheek with a gentleness that felt completely wrong given the situation. "I know you're scared. I know this seems extreme, but you have to understand, Jackie. You belong to me. You always have. From the moment I first caught your scent when we were kids, you became mine. Let me go. Please, Declan. This is wrong. You can't just—" My words died in my throat as he lifted my right wrist, turning it so I could see the inner side. There, in elegant script, were initials I'd never noticed before. DM Declan Morrison. A tattoo I didn't remember getting. "I gave you this when you were unconscious at 15, he said matter-of-factly, as if drugging and tattooing someone was perfectly normal. "You had that accident during the school camping trip, remember? Fell and hit your head. They took you to the hospital. I made sure I was there, made sure the mark was permanent." His thumb traced over the ink and I felt bile rise in my throat. How long had this been going on? How deep did this obsession run? My whole body began to shake. Not from cold, but from the horrifying realization that my life had never really been my own. Someone had been watching, waiting, planning this for years. "You're a monster," I choked out, tears streaming down my face now. "This isn't love. This is sick." For the first time, something flickered across his face. Pain maybe, or anger. He stood abruptly, the chair scraping back. "I'm giving you time to process this, to understand. But make no mistake, Jackie, there's no escape from here. No one knows where you are. No one's coming to save you. This basement is soundproof, locked, and completely cut off from the outside world." He He walked toward the stairs, then paused, looking back at me one last time. I've waited 10 years for this. I can wait a little longer for you to accept the truth. The door slammed shut. The lock clicked. And I was alone with hundreds of photos of myself staring back at me. A gallery of a life I'd lived without knowing I was never truly alone. I pulled against the chains until my wrists bled, screaming until my voice gave out. But no one came. No one heard. There was only silence, darkness, and the overwhelming scent of alpha pheromones that lingered in the air, marking this place as his territory, as his possession. I looked up at the photos again, studying them with fresh horror. Some were recent, from last week, last month. But others were old, faded, yellowed with age. Pictures of me as a teenager, as a child. He'd been documenting my entire existence like I was some kind of specimen. The level of detail was suffocating. In one corner, I could see pictures of me sleeping through my bedroom window. In another, photos of me showering behind frosted glass. Nothing had been private. Nothing had been sacred. My omega biology was betraying me, trying to calm down in response to the alpha scent, but my human mind refused. I wasn't going to accept this. I couldn't. I had to find a way out, had to fight back somehow. But as I sat there in that cold basement, chained and surrounded by evidence of a decade-long obsession, one terrible thought kept circling through my mind. What if he never let me go? What if this was my life now? Trapped in the twisted fantasy of someone who'd loved me from the shadows for so long that he'd convinced himself kidnapping me was an act of devotion. The bulb above me flickered, and in that moment of strobing light, I saw my own reflection in the glossy surface of a photograph. I looked terrified, broken, exactly how he wanted me. Time became meaningless in the basement. Without windows or clocks, I couldn't tell if hours or days had passed. My throat was raw from screaming earlier, my wrists bruised and bleeding from fighting the chains. Eventually exhaustion had won and I'd slumped against the wall, drifting in and out of consciousness, filled with nightmares that were somehow less terrifying than reality. The sound of the lock turning made my eyes snap open. Declan descended the stairs carrying a tray, and the smell hit me immediately. Chicken sandwich and orange juice. My favorite meal. The fact that he knew this made my skin crawl. How much had he studied me? How many of my preferences, habits, and routines had he cataloged in that sick mind of his? You need to eat, he said, setting the tray on a small table I hadn't noticed before. He pulled it closer to where I sat, then actually unlocked one of my hands. I immediately thought about fighting, running, attacking, but the rational part of my brain knew I wouldn't make it 3 steps before he overpowered me. He was bigger, stronger, and clearly had planned for every contingency. I ate in silence, hating that I was hungry, hating that the food tasted good, hating every second of this. Declan sat across from me on that same metal chair, watching with an intensity that made every bite uncomfortable. I need you to understand something, Jackie, he began, his voice taking on a different quality, softer, almost vulnerable. That first day I saw you in school, you were in 8th grade and I was in 9th. You probably don't remember. Why would you? But you walked past me in the hallway, and your scent hit me like a freight train. Vanilla and something sweeter, something uniquely you. I'd never experienced anything like it before. My alpha instincts woke up that day, and they've never gone quiet since. I forced myself to swallow the bite I'd been chewing, my appetite vanishing. That doesn't give you the right to stalk me for a decade. That doesn't justify any of this. I'm not asking for justification, he replied, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. I'm trying to help you understand the depth of what I feel. Every decision I've made since that day has been with you in mind. When I chose my career path, I picked something that would make me worthy of you. When I built my life, I built it to be a castle for you to live in. You were always the endgame, Jackie. Always. The way he said it, with such complete conviction, was somehow more frightening than anger would have been. This wasn't a temporary fixation. This was the foundation of his entire existence. You're delusional, I said flatly, setting down the sandwich. I'm not some prize you won. I'm a person with my own life, my own choices, my own future that doesn't include being imprisoned by a psychopath. His jaw tightened, the first real sign of anger I'd seen. He stood up and paced to the wall of photographs, running his hand across them like they were precious artifacts. Do you see this one? He pointed to a picture of me from about 3 years ago, sitting on a bench looking at my phone. You just had your heart broken by that alpha from your statistics class. What was his name? Ryan. You sat there for 2 hours crying and I sat 50 feet away wanting to kill him for making you feel that way. You were there? Horror washed over me in waves. You've been following me for years. Actually stalking me, protecting you, he corrected, turning to face me with fierce eyes. Do you know how many times I've stopped bad things from happening to you? That night you almost got mugged walking home late. I took care of it. The guy who was putting something in your drink at that bar last year. I made sure he never tried that again with anyone. You think you've been living your life freely, but you've had a guardian angel the entire time. I wanted to vomit. Every moment of privacy I thought I'd had was a lie. Every time I'd felt safe and alone, he'd been watching. A guardian angel doesn't chain people up in basements. No, he agreed, moving back toward me with predatory grace. But a desperate man does. Because 3 weeks ago, I saw you with someone new. Another alpha. You were laughing at something he said, touching his arm, looking at him the way I've dreamed about you looking at me. I realized I was running out of time. That if I didn't act, I'd lose you forever to someone who could never love you like I do. He crouched down in front of me, and I pressed myself back against the wall. Instinctively, his hand came up slowly, giving me time to see it coming, and he cupped my face with a gentleness that felt obscene. I had to bring you here. Had to make you see that we belong together. You can hate me now, but eventually you'll understand. Eventually you'll feel it too. Never. I spat, jerking my face away from his touch. I'll never feel anything for you except disgust. The words seemed to hit him physically. He flinched, pulling back and standing up. For a long moment he just stared at me, and I saw something broken in his expression. Not broken enough to let me go, but broken enough to make me realize he actually believed his own twisted logic. Fine, he said quietly, reaching into his jacket. He pulled out a leather-bound journal and tossed it onto the table. Read this when you're ready. It contains everything. Every thought I've had about you. Every moment I've documented. Every plan I've made. Maybe then you'll see this isn't some sudden madness. This is a love story that's been written over 10 years. I stared at the journal like it was a bomb. I don't want to read your sick fantasies. It's not a request, he said, his voice hardening. You're going to be here for a while, Jackie. You can spend that time fighting reality, or you can spend it understanding what we are to each other. Your choice. He picked up the tray and walked toward the stairs. Just before he reached them, he stopped and looked back. Oh, and Jackie? That new alpha you were seeing? He won't be bothering you anymore. I made sure of that. The smile that crossed his face was chilling. No one touches what's mine. The door closed. The lock clicked. And I was alone again with that journal sitting in front of me, promising answers I wasn't sure I wanted. Because part of me, the terrified, rational part, knew that once I understood the full scope of his obsession, there would be no going back. I'd see exactly how deep this rabbit hole went. And I wasn't sure I could survive that knowledge. I refused to touch the journal for what felt like an eternity. It sat on that table mocking me, daring me to open it and peek into the mind of someone who'd made me the center of his entire universe without my knowledge or consent. But eventually, with nothing else to do in that basement except stare at my own photographed life, curiosity won over disgust. The first entry was dated 10 years ago, written in neat handwriting that somehow made it worse. It read, "Today I saw the person who will define the rest of my existence." Jackie Ellis walked past me in the school hallway, and my world tilted on its axis. I don't believe in fate, but if I did, this would be it. I need to know everything about him. I need to become worthy of him. Starting tomorrow, I begin the rest of my life. I felt sick reading it, but I couldn't stop. Page after page detailed my life from an outsider's perspective. He documented things I'd completely forgotten. The day I bombed a math test and cried in the library. The time I won an award at the school assembly. The afternoon I got into a fight with my best friend over something stupid. He'd been there for all of it, invisible and obsessive. The entries grew more detailed as years passed. He'd learned my class schedule, my route home, my favorite places. He'd even noted what I wore each day, what I ate for lunch, who I talked to. The level of surveillance was suffocating. But what disturbed me most were his plans. He'd written extensively about improving himself to be worthy of me, getting into better shape, learning to fight, building wealth through increasingly questionable means. I've joined the organization today. One entry from 6 years ago read, "They call themselves a family, but I know what they really are. Criminals. Killers. Exactly what I need to become. Protect Jackie. In this world, only the powerful survive, and I will become powerful enough that no one can ever take him from me." My hands shook as I realized what he was saying. Declan had joined the mafia, had become a criminal specifically to build the kind of power that would let him keep me. This wasn't just obsession, this was a complete reconstruction of his entire life with me as the blueprint. The basement door opened. I didn't even look up from the journal, couldn't tear my eyes away from the horrifying narrative. Declan's footsteps approached slowly, cautiously. "You're reading it," he observed, and I heard something like relief in his voice. "You destroyed your life for me," I said, still staring at the pages. "You became a monster for someone who didn't even know you existed." "I became strong for you," he corrected, sitting down on the floor near me. Not on the chair this time, but at my level. "Everything I did was to ensure that when this moment came, I'd be ready, that I could give you everything you deserved." I finally looked up at him, really looked at him. His face was handsome in a harsh way, with sharp angles and shadows that suggested violence lived just beneath the surface. But his eyes, those dark, intense eyes, held something that looked almost like pain. "What you deserve is to be locked up. You're a kidnapper. A stalker. Based on this journal, probably a murderer too." "7 people," he said calmly, as if discussing the weather. "I've killed 7 people who posed threats to you or to my ability to reach you. The mugger I mentioned. That alpha, who drugged drinks. 3 rival gang members who were tracking your movements for leverage against me. And 2 people who simply knew too much about my plans." The casual way he listed human deaths made my blood run cold. "You're proving my point. You're a monster." "Perhaps," he acknowledged, reaching out to touch the journal, still in my lap. "But I'm your monster. That has to count for something." "It doesn't." I closed the journal and pushed it away. "Nothing in here justifies what you've done. Nothing makes this okay." Declan was quiet for a long moment, and I watched something shift in his expression. He stood up and walked to where my chains were anchored to the wall. My heart raced, thinking he might be angry, might hit me. Instead, he produced a key and unlocked them completely. I stared at my freed wrists in shock, rubbing the raw, bruised skin. "What are you doing?" "Proving something," he said, backing away toward the stairs. "The door is locked, yes, but you're no longer chained. You can move around this space freely. There's a bathroom behind that door. Supplies, everything you need. I'm not trying to torture you, Jackie. I'm trying to make you understand." "Understand what? That I'm in a prettier cage?" I stood up shakily, my legs weak from sitting in one position for so long. "That I trust you," he replied. "And that I'm hoping you'll eventually trust me enough to see past the methods to the truth underneath. I love you. I've loved you for 10 years with a consistency and devotion most people never experience in a lifetime. Love doesn't look like this." I shouted, anger finally overwhelming fear. "Love is built on mutual respect, on choice, on freedom. This is possession. This is ownership. This is everything love isn't supposed to be." His face contorted with emotion, frustration, sadness, something desperate. "Then teach me," he said, and his voice cracked. "Show me what it's supposed to look like, because this is all I know. Watching from the shadows, protecting from a distance, wanting but never having. You're asking me to be something I've never learned how to be." The vulnerability in his admission caught me off guard. For the first time since waking up in this nightmare, I saw him not as an invincible threat, but as a deeply damaged person who'd twisted love into something unrecognizable. "You can't learn to love by forcing someone to stay with you." "I know that," he said quietly. "But I couldn't risk letting you walk away before you knew how I felt. Before you understood the depth of it. Maybe that makes me selfish. Maybe it makes me evil. But I'd rather be evil and have a chance than be good and lose you forever." He started up the stairs, then paused halfway. "I meant what I said, Jackie. You're not chained anymore. I want you to stay because you choose to, not because you have to. Even if that choice takes time. Even if it never comes." He looked back at me one last time. There's food in the mini fridge, books on the shelf. I'll be back tomorrow morning. The door closed behind him, leaving me standing in the middle of the basement, unchained but still trapped. I looked around at the walls covered in my stolen moments, at the journal filled with a decade of obsession, at the bathroom door promising some semblance of dignity, and I realized something terrifying. Part of me, a small traitorous part, was curious about what tomorrow's conversation would bring. Not because I was starting to accept this, not because Stockholm Syndrome was setting in, but because I needed to understand the psychology of someone who could love this destructively. I needed to understand him if I had any hope of escaping him, or at least, that's what I told myself as I picked up the journal again and kept reading. The days blurred together in a strange rhythm I never thought possible. Declan kept his word. No more chains, no more locks on the bathroom door, no more treating me like a prisoner. Instead, something far more unsettling developed: a routine. He'd come down each morning with breakfast, and we'd eat together while he talked about mundane things like the weather or books he'd been reading. It felt surreal, sitting across from my kidnapper discussing his thoughts on classic literature. "I brought ingredients for dinner tonight," he said one afternoon, setting grocery bags on the small kitchen counter I'd only just noticed existed in the corner of the basement. "Thought we could cook together. You used to make pasta every Thursday night when you lived in that apartment on 5th Street. I remember watching you through the window, thinking how domestic and peaceful you looked." The casual admission of his surveillance should have horrified me, but I'd grown somewhat numb to it. Instead, I found myself asking, "What kind of pasta?" The question felt like a betrayal of myself. "But Alice does strange things to the mind." "Carbonara," he answered, pulling out eggs, bacon, and parmesan. "Your specialty." We cooked in silence at first, moving around each other in the small space. His presence was overwhelming. Not just physically, though; he was considerably larger than me, but energetically. Every time he reached past me for a utensil or ingredient, his alpha pheromones washed over me, making my omega biology respond in ways I desperately wished I could control. My hands would steady when they'd been shaking. My breathing would slow when anxiety spiked. It was infuriating. "Can I ask you something?" I said while whisking eggs, needing to break the comfortable silence that felt too much like acceptance. "Anything." "When did it stop being about watching from a distance? When did you decide to actually take me?" I kept my eyes on the bowl, unable to look at him while asking. Declan was quiet for a long moment, the only sound the sizzling of bacon in the pan. "3 weeks ago, when I saw you with Andrew," he finally said. "The alpha from your office. You two went to lunch and he made you laugh so hard you had tears in your eyes. Then he touched your lower back when guiding you through a door, and I saw you lean into it. That's when I knew I was running out of time." "So you decided kidnapping was the logical next step?" I couldn't keep the bitterness from my voice. "No," he said firmly, turning off the stove and facing me fully. "I decided that living without you was no longer an option I could tolerate." "Was it selfish?" "Absolutely." "Was it wrong?" "By every moral standard, yes. But I'd watched you almost slip away from me so many times over the years. Relationships that almost worked out. Jobs that might have taken you to other cities. Moments where I thought I'd lost you before ever having you. I couldn't let it happen again." I set down the whisk and finally met his eyes. "You keep talking about having me, but you never actually tried to be part of my life normally. You could have introduced yourself, asked me on a date, been a regular person instead of a shadow." "I considered it," he admitted, and something vulnerable crossed his features. "Every single day for 10 years, I thought about walking up to you and saying hello. But what if you rejected me? What if you saw me and felt nothing? At least in the shadows, I could pretend there was still a chance. At least from a distance, you couldn't confirm my worst fear, that I meant nothing to you." The honesty in his confession caught me off guard. This wasn't the confident, controlling man who'd chained me up days ago. This was someone terrified of rejection, so afraid of losing something he'd never had that he'd rather steal it than risk asking. "That's the most cowardly thing I've ever heard," I said, but my voice lacked heat. "You built an entire criminal empire, killed people, orchestrated my kidnapping, but you were too scared to say hello." He flinched like I'd struck him. "Yes." We stood there in the small kitchen, dinner half prepared, the weight of a decade of one-sided obsession hanging between us. I should have felt triumphant, having made him admit his weakness. Instead, I felt something uncomfortably close to pity. "The pasta's going to burn," I said quietly, nodding toward the stove. We finished cooking in renewed silence. But something had shifted. That night, we ate dinner on the couch in front of a small television I hadn't noticed before. Declan put on a movie, some romantic drama I vaguely recognized but had never seen. Halfway through, during a particularly emotional scene, he spoke again. "You make me feel human, Jackie." His voice was so soft I almost missed it. "Before you, I was just a weapon. My father shaped me into something that could hurt others, and the organization that into something profitable. But when I think about you, when I'm near you, I remember that I'm supposed to be more than just violence and control." I turned to look at him, really study his face in the flickering television light. He looked tired, older than his years, carrying weights I couldn't fully comprehend. "Then be more than that," I heard myself say. "Not for me, but for yourself." "I don't know how," he admitted, and the raw honesty in those 4 words made my chest tight. "Neither do I," I replied, looking back at the screen. "But keeping me here isn't the answer. This isn't love, Declan. Whatever you feel, whatever we might potentially have, it can't start like this." He was quiet for so long I thought the conversation was over. Then he stood up, walked to a drawer, and pulled something out. When he returned, he held out his hand. In his palm was a key. "This opens the basement door," he said, his voice steady despite the tremor I could see in his hand. "You're free to leave whenever you choose." I stared at the key like it might be a trick, a test, another layer of manipulation. "What's the catch?" "No catch," he said, pressing it into my hand. "I'm asking you to stay, not forcing you. If you walk out that door, I won't follow. I won't track you, I'll let you go completely. But I'm hoping you'll give me a chance to show you that I can be someone worthy of choosing to stay with." The metal of the key was warm from his hand. I closed my fist around it, feeling its weight, its promise of freedom. "I don't know if I can trust this." "I know," he said, sitting back down but maintaining distance between us now. "I've given you every reason not to trust me, but I'm trying to give you a reason to start." I looked down at the key in my hand, then back at him. The smart thing would be to run, to take this opportunity and never look back. Call the police, press charges, get him locked away where he belonged. But as I sat there, I realized something that terrified me more than anything that had happened so far. I wasn't sure I wanted to leave yet, not because I'd fallen for him. That would be absurd. But because some part of me needed to understand how this would end, needed to see if someone this broken could actually change, or if I'd just been a catalyst for temporary guilt. "I'm not promising anything," I said finally, slipping the key into my pocket. "But I'll stay. For now." The relief that flooded his expression was almost painful to witness. He nodded, not reaching for me, not pushing for more. "That's all I'm asking for." We turned back to the movie, and I tried to ignore the fact that having the means of escape somehow made the basement feel less like a prison and more like a choice I was actively making. And that realization was more terrifying than any chain had ever been. Morning came with unexpected brightness. Declan appeared at the basement door, but this time he looked different. Almost nervous. "I want to show you something," he said. "The rest of the house. My world. No more hiding things from you." I touched the key in my pocket, my constant reminder that I could leave, and nodded. Following him up the stairs felt like crossing a threshold I couldn't uncross. The basement door opened into a hallway that took my breath away. This wasn't just a house, it was a fortress disguised as a mansion. High ceilings, expensive artwork, and an atmosphere of controlled power that permeated every surface. "Welcome to my reality," Declan said, watching my reaction carefully. "This is headquarters for the Eastern District operations. I live here, work here, command from here." We walked through corridors where armed men nodded respectfully at Declan and eyed me with curiosity. I felt exposed, vulnerable in a way I hadn't in the basement. Down there it had been just the 2 of us. Up here I was being introduced to an entire world, built on violence and control. "How many people work for you?" I asked, trying to process the scope of what I was seeing. "Directly, about 50. Indirectly, several hundred across the city." He led me to a massive office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the grounds. "This is where I run everything, where I've made decisions that have shaped this organization for the past 5 years." I walked to the window, looking out at the manicured gardens and high walls. You said you killed your father when you were 16. Tell me what really happened. Declan moved to stand beside me, careful not to touch. He came home drunk one night, angrier than usual, started beating me like he had 1,000 times before. But that night, something in me, or maybe something finally snapped into place. I fought back. We struggled and he fell down the stairs. Broke his neck. And the mafia just took you in? I pressed, needing to understand the full picture. The organization had been watching me for a while. My father had debts with them and they saw potential in me. They gave me a choice: become useful or become an example. I chose survival. He turned to face me fully. Everything I've built since then has been with one purpose: becoming someone you couldn't ignore. Someone who could give you everything. I never wanted an empire built on blood. I said quietly. I wanted a normal life with someone who chose me for me, not someone who stalked me for a decade and then imprisoned me in their cousin. I know that now, he said, and the defeat in his voice was genuine. I see how twisted my logic was, how my fear of rejection created exactly what I was afraid of: your rejection of who I've become. Before I could respond, the sound of shattering glass exploded through the room. Declan moved faster than I thought possible, grabbing me and pulling me to the ground as gunfire erupted from somewhere outside. The windows exploded inward, raining glass down on us. "Stay down," he shouted, covering my body with his as bullets tore through the office. Men were shouting, footsteps thundering in the hallways. This was an attack, a coordinated assault on the mansion. "Who's shooting?" I gasped, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. "Rivals. They've been waiting for an opportunity." He pulled a gun from a desk drawer, checking the magazine with practiced efficiency. "They must have learned about you. You're my weakness now, exposed." The guilt in those words wasn't lost on me. I'd become a target because of his obsession with me. "What do we do?" "You stay here behind the desk. Don't move until I come back for you." He started toward the door, but I grabbed his arm. "Don't leave me alone in this." Something shifted in his eyes, surprise, maybe, or hope. "Then stay close and do exactly what I say." We moved through the mansion like we were in a war zone. Because guards were exchanging fire with intruders, the sound deafening in the enclosed spaces. Declan kept me behind him, his body a constant shield between me and danger. I watched him shoot with precision that spoke of years of training, each movement calculated and efficient. An attacker came around a corner, gun raised. Declan fired, but so did the other man. I watched in horror as Declan stumbled, blood blooming across his shoulder. He didn't stop, didn't even pause, just kept moving, kept protecting, kept putting himself between me and anyone who might hurt me. "Declan, you're hit." I couldn't stop the scream that tore from my throat. "I'm fine," he gritted out, though blood was soaking through his shirt. "Just keep moving." We made it to a reinforced safe room, where several of his men had regrouped. A medic immediately moved toward Declan, but he waved them off. "Secure the perimeter first. Make sure there are no more breaches." The medic looked like he wanted to argue but knew better. As the fighting outside continued, Declan finally let me see the wound. The bullet had gone through his shoulder, missing anything vital but clearly causing him significant pain. "Let me help," I said, grabbing supplies from the medical kit the guards had brought. My hands shook as I started cleaning the wound, but I forced myself to focus. "You saved my life out there. I'd do it again," he said through gritted teeth as I worked. "Every time, without hesitation." "Why?" I demanded, meeting his eyes. "If you'd just let me go from the beginning, none of this would have happened. You wouldn't be bleeding, and I wouldn't be terrified. Because without you, none of this means anything," he said, his voice raw with pain and something deeper. "This empire, this power, this life, I built it all as a monument to someone who didn't even know I existed. I'd burn every bit of it down if it meant keeping you safe." I finished bandaging his shoulder in silence, processing his words. Outside, the gunfire had stopped. One of his lieutenants entered and reported that all intruders had been eliminated, the mansion secured. Losses on their side were minimal. "Good," Declan said, still looking at me. "Double the perimeter guards and review all security footage. I want to know how they got through our defenses." As the man left to execute the orders, I sat back and really looked at Declan. Here was a man who'd just been shot protecting me, who'd killed to keep me safe, who was running a criminal empire with me at the center of it all. The rational part of my brain screamed that I should be horrified, should run now while I had the chance. But the key in my pocket felt heavier than ever, and I realized something that changed everything. I'd been genuinely terrified when I thought he might die. Not because I was trapped, but because the thought of losing him actually hurt. What did that say about me? About what was happening between us? I didn't have answers, but as I sat there with his blood on my hands and my heart still racing, I knew I'd crossed a line I couldn't uncross. I'd started to care whether he lived or died, and that terrified me more than any of the violence I'd just witnessed. The mansion settled into uneasy quiet after the attack. Declan's wound had been properly treated by a doctor who appeared within the hour. No questions asked, no hospital involved. This was the world he lived in, where bullet wounds were handled privately and violence was just another Tuesday. I sat beside his bed in what I now understood was the master suite. He'd refused to rest until every security protocol had been updated, every guard debriefed, every possible entry point reinforced. Only when his lieutenants had literally forced him to lie down did he finally comply, and even then he'd insisted I stay with him. "You don't have to watch over me," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion and pain medication. "You have the key. You could walk out right now, and no one would stop you." "I know," I replied, and it was true. In the chaos after the attack, I'd watched guards pass me multiple times. None had made any move to restrain me. Declan had given orders that I was free to move anywhere I wanted, leave whenever I chose. But I'm choosing to stay here. His eyes, heavy with medication, focused on me with an intensity that cut through the fog. Why? It was the question I'd been asking myself for hours. Why hadn't I run when bullets were flying? Why had I screamed when he'd been shot? Why was I sitting here now, voluntarily keeping watch over a man who'd kidnapped me just days ago? "Because when I saw that bullet hit you, I realized something," I said slowly, working through the thoughts I'd been afraid to examine too closely. "I was terrified. Not for myself. Not because I'd be left alone with your enemies. I was terrified because I thought you might die, and that feeling was real." Declan tried to sit up, but I put a hand on his uninjured shoulder, keeping him down. "Don't move. You need to rest. Jackie, I need you to understand something," he said, his hand coming up to cover mine. "You can feel whatever you're feeling, but you're not obligated to stay because of it. Stockholm Syndrome is real, and I won't—" "Don't," I interrupted, surprised by the firmness in my own voice. "Don't reduce what I'm feeling to a psychological condition. I'm not stupid. I know what Stockholm Syndrome is. I know that captives can develop feelings for their captors as a survival mechanism, but I also know that I'm sitting here with a key in my pocket that would let me walk away from all of this. And I'm choosing not to use it." "Then what are you choosing?" he asked, vulnerability bleeding through every word. I took a deep breath, knowing that what I was about to say would change everything. "I'm choosing to give this whatever this is between us a chance. But on my terms, not yours." He went very still. "What terms?" "First, you need to promise me something, and I need to believe it's real." I pulled my hand back, needing the distance to say what came next. "Promise me that from this moment forward, I'm not your possession. I'm not the obsession you've built your life around. If I stay as your equal partner. Someone who has as much say in this relationship as you do." "Done," he said immediately, without hesitation. "I'm not finished," I continued. "Second, no more surveillance. No more watching me when I don't know about it. No more controlling where I go or who I talk to. If this is going to work, you need to trust me the way you're asking me to trust you." "Agreed," he said, though I could see how much it cost him to say it. "And third," I said, my voice softer now, "you need to understand that what happened between us, the kidnapping, the chains, the basement, that was wrong. I need you to acknowledge that it is wrong not just tactically but morally. And I need to know that you'll never do anything like that again to anyone, including me." Declan was quiet for a long moment, and I watched emotions play across his face. Shame, regret, determination. "You're right, it was wrong. I knew it was wrong even as I was doing it. But I convinced myself the ends would justify the means. They don't. They never could. And I swear to you on everything I am that I will never violate your autonomy like that again." The sincerity in his words felt genuine, but I needed to push further. What about the violence? The killing? Your empire is built on blood, Declan. I can't pretend that's not part of who you are. I won't lie to you and say I'm leaving this life. He said carefully. This organization has been my family, my purpose, my survival for too long. But I can promise you that I'll try to be better. Make different choices where I can. The violence you saw today, I'll always protect you like that. But the casual cruelty, the unnecessary brutality, I can work on that. It wasn't a perfect answer, but it was honest. And somehow that mattered more than false promises of complete transformation. Okay, I said, feeling the weight of the decision settle over me. Then I'm staying, not as your prisoner, not as your obsession, but as someone who wants to see if two incredibly broken people can actually make something real out of this disaster. Relief flooded his features, followed by something that looked like awe. You're giving me a chance I don't deserve. Probably, I agreed, a small smile tugging at my lips, despite everything. But maybe that's what love is supposed to be, giving someone a chance they don't deserve and seeing what they do with it. He reached for my hand again, and this time I let him take it. His fingers intertwined with mine, and I felt the connection between us solidify into something more than captor and captive, more than obsession and object. This was a choice I was making with clear eyes and full awareness of how wrong it might look from the outside. There's something else, Declan said, lifting my wrist where his initials were tattooed. This mark, I need you to know I did it when you were unconscious. After that accident. It was a violation, and I'm sorry. If you want it removed or covered, I'll pay for whatever you want. I looked at the tattoo, really seeing it for the first time since I'd learned its origin. No, I said, surprising myself. Keep it, but understand that it doesn't mean I'm your Horpa. It means that I've chosen to wear your mark because I want to, not because you forced it on me. His thumb traced over the ink, reverent and gentle. I understand. And Declan? I leaned closer, my voice dropping to barely above a whisper. I'm yours, but you're also mine. That's how this works from now on. I'm yours, he repeated, the words sounding like a vow. Always have been, even when you didn't know I existed. I leaned down and kissed him, the first kiss I'd initiated, the first touch between us that wasn't tainted by force or fear. His lips were soft against mine, hesitant at first, as if he couldn't believe I was really choosing this. When I deepened the kiss, his hand came up to cup the back of my head, fingers threading through my hair with a gentleness that contradicted everything I knew about him. When we finally broke apart, I rested my forehead against his, both of us breathing heavily. This is insane, I whispered. Everything about this is completely insane. I know, he whispered back. But is it the kind of insane you can live with? I pulled back enough to look into his eyes, seeing the vulnerability there, the hope, the fear that I might still change my mind. Yes, I said simply. It's the kind of insane I can live with. We stayed like that for a while, wrapped up in each other in the aftermath of violence and confession. Outside, the world would judge us, would call me a victim of manipulation, would call him a monster who'd gotten away with kidnapping. And maybe they wouldn't be completely wrong. But as I settled into the bed beside him, careful of his injured shoulder, I realized that sometimes love doesn't follow the rules. Sometimes it grows in the darkest places, between the most broken people in the most impossible circumstances. And sometimes you have to choose to believe in it anyway. The key stayed in my pocket, a reminder that I always had a choice. But as Declan's breathing evened out into sleep, his hands still holding mine, I knew I'd already made my choice. I was staying not because I had to, but because somewhere in this twisted beginning, we'd found something real, and I wanted to see where that truth would take us.